Hello, I am Matty Dalrymple, the indie author, and this is an episode of What Writers Can Learn, where I am joined by fellow writers to discuss what we can learn from a work. And in this case, we're going to be discussing Spike Lee's movie Inside Man. And these events are open to patrons of the indie author and past podcast guests. And so if you'd like to join us and you are not yet a patron, just head over to patreon.com/the indie author, and that's indie with a Y, to explore membership options, which start at $1 per month. And my co-host for these events is Jennifer Hilt, the author of the TROPE Thesaurus and a two-time guest on the podcast. Jennifer was on the podcast back in episode 140, Troping Your Way to a Stronger Story. And she also joined me and Michael Aron to talk about Year End, the Writing Craft and the Publishing Voyage in episode 163. So, hey, Jennifer, how are you doing?
Super fun. Yeah, great to see you.
Yeah, lovely to see you. And today we are joined by Mary Van Everbroeck. Mary, did I say your last name correctly?
You said it fine. Everbroeck, it's fine.
Okay, what do you say?
Everbroeck.
Everbroeck. Okay, great. And do you want to just share a sentence or two about your own background?
Sure. I guess I've been writing now for 2 years on and off, and primarily zeroing in on learning how to write short stories and using the dialogue-centric method. And my real job is I'm a marriage and family counselor. I've been for over 30 years. So.
Oh, wow.
Great. Well, that will be a very interesting perspective to bring to some of the conversations that we have.
Absolutely.
In the sense that all good movies are relationships, all good books, all good stories are about relationships. So that will be an interesting expertise area to tap into. So welcome, Jennifer and Mary. And today we're going to be talking about Spike Lee's movie Inside Man. And I'm just going to share a quick summary of the movie. A tough detective, Denzel Washington, matches wits with a cunning bank robber, Clive Owen, as a tense hostage crisis is unfolding. Into the volatile situation comes a woman named Madaline, Jodie Foster, a mysterious power broker who has a hidden agenda and threatens to push the tense situation past the breaking point. And so as we discuss the Inside Man, I'm going to be asking Jennifer and Mary to keep in mind two questions. What is something you liked about the movie that you would consider modeling in your own work? And then what is something that you didn't like about the movie that you would avoid modeling in your own work? And since often our focus in these circumstances are the tropes around the movie that we're talking about, Jennifer, can you just get us started by talking about what is the trope genre that Inside Man is a part of, and what tropes should we be looking for and discussing?
Yeah, sure. Great. I love how completely jam-packed this story is with tropes. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's one of my favorite movies that I've rewatched recently. But I think the first one that, there's no way we can escape is, of course, forced proximity, because we've got all of this, and that's just kind of inherent to a heist movie. You're going to have everybody kind of trapped in one area. But the other thing that I really love is that the heist kind of element in itself just has a whole bunch of other tropes embedded in it. So it's got the ticking time bomb, because of course we only have a certain amount of time to get the thing. It has the MacGuffin, which is what we figure out the thing is that we're trying to get. And then the other thing that's great is that there's always the secret element. And this movie, I think one of the reasons why this movie does so well is that Spike Lee and the writer, whose name I forgot, have really doubled down on the secret element. And I think that's kind of their secret sauce for why this movie just really works so well. So those are like the kind of big ones that I would think of. And then there's a whole bunch of ones we can kind of talk about, like funneling down from that. But those are just kind of to get us started.
Okay. Well, overall, I'm assuming you had recommended the movie, so I'm assuming you recommended it because you enjoyed it, right?
Yes.
What are some of the things that drew you to it as a right. student of tropes?
Yeah. Well, I have to say that when I watched it, it was a while ago, and I hadn't watched it since I've done all this trope work. And so it was really fun. It's really fun then to go like back and see something and then be like, oh, that's why I liked it, because it had all this stuff going on that I didn't understand when I first watched it, but I was just kind of drawn to. So I think really the elements of what I like about the movie in a nutshell is that idea that we keep going back to of simple plot and complex characters. And in a way, it's a heist movie, but the plot's really simple. These people want to steal something, and the other people don't want to give it up. So that's like the simple goal that's going on. And then within that, we just have a really great cast of characters who are complex. They're not, everybody's like is not exactly who they appear to be on the surface. And that kind of gets, is better explored as the movie goes on. And I think that's really the other element that makes it so strong, is that it's really people driven. I am not a fan of the what are they? The ones with the Oceans one. Oceans Heist movies are not my personal favorites, but I think because I really like the character development that you get in something like this versus something like those.
So you're thinking of those as more sort of like stock characters, the Oceans movies more like stock characters, or
yeah, I feel like the Oceans movies really rely on the actors that they hire are very similar to the brands they consistently portray. And that is really what they use to push that along, as opposed to like these other stories, like something like this, where you're not sure really who the good guys and the bad guys are. And even people who've maybe, like somebody like Christopher Plummer, who, generally doesn't always play these like bad guys. In this one, it's like, oh, you're like, well, who is he exactly? And things like that. And the same thing with the Jodie Foster character. So, and others, but so I like that element of it for me, which is one of the reasons why I suggested it.
how about you, Mary? What did you think about it?
Oh, I watched it today, and I just, there was so much going on, and I think it was, when you really looked at it, not just watched it, but looked in terms of tropes, it was just filled. I think it was great. A lot of, I guess you'd call them red herrings, where you think something's going to happen, but something else happens. So I picked a lot of that out. The MacGuffin, I'm not sure I picked up what that was, or the secret sauce. I'll be interested to hear what you have to say about that. But I thought the only thing I didn't like about it was the music. The music in the beginning drove me nuts.
Yes.
Yeah.
There were a couple of things. I have a couple of bones to pick. And I'm also going to say right off the bat, let's just assume they're going to be spoilers here, because I think that this kind of movie is too difficult to talk about and try to be coy about plot points. But I totally agree. The music was so over the top. And I really felt like I was being sort of jerked around in terms of, is this going to be kind of a gritty realism movie, or is it going to be kind of like a action, cartoony, sort of tongue-in-cheek, meta, examination of heist movies? And the music was one of those things that I thought was indicating that it was a meta sort of tongue-in-cheek. Let's all kind of laugh at some of these tropes. I mean, I almost felt like he was making us laugh at some of the tropes. While at the same time, there were some things that I wouldn't expect, like Denzel Washington kept having to clear his throat. I don't know. I don't really need to watch Denzel Washington up close, stopping in the middle of some dialogue to clear his throat. I can imagine that if it were more, it's intended to be kind of more documentary-esque, but it clearly wasn't. Like, what did you guys think about that? Did that seem like a contradiction to you, or did it all seem of a piece to you?
I wondered. Oh, go ahead, Mary.
I wondered if he had a sinus infection or cold while he was doing the movie. I don't know.
Editing, people, editing.
Oh, I don't know what you thought, Jen.
I didn't actually really notice it, but yeah, maybe, yeah, now that you say it, okay, I'm have to go in and check it out. I think there's some definitely like incongruities with it that and the part that I thought was incongruous was, well, one of the incongruities was the Denzel Washington's relationship with his girlfriend. And it was like, really, the only thing I can think, it seemed like she was there more than I would have thought she would be in such a small role. So the only thing I could think of is they'd shot a lot more and then edited a whole bunch of it down. But it was like, she was there in the beginning. There was like a phone call with her saying he was going to be getting home late. And then this kind of like long scene at the end. And I was like, a little like, I wonder, it just kind of, I get it, because they wanted to have like the diamond pocket thing. And
that's what,
yeah, I thought it was an excuse for the diamond the diamond
Yeah,
reveal.
but it
Yeah.
seemed longer than I thought you needed kind of for that, or you even
Yeah.
like needed to see that. I mean, you could have just pulled it out of his pocket, like walking up the stairs or something. But those were the kind of things I noticed, but I hadn't noticed the throat clearing. So now I'm curious about that. Although now I
Did
wonder,
it a
like,
couple
oh,
times, yeah.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
he did it twice. And even in
Twice?
the end part, there was that that part where he's taking things out of his pocket.
Yeah.
And I think this is what you're talking about, Jennifer, that it was, you've seen that scene where people like take things out of their pocket. It's all the things that are representing their life. There's his
Yeah.
his badge and his gun and his this and
Right.
his that, and you know, unloading his gun.
Right.
And for apparently no reason other than to set him up to put his hand in his pocket and find the diamond.
Mhm.
And it was kind of like, I felt like obviously Spike Lee's smarter than this, but he had the trope checklist. And he was like, you know what? We haven't gotten to yet. That scene where the guy takes the stuff out of his pocket that represents his life. Let's just stick that on at the end. And I did kind of feel like, and I'm willing to admit this was because I'm not sophisticated enough to understand the nuances, but there were a couple of things like that that felt like sticking the trope in just because you have to, or because he was poking fun at it. It did kind of feel like he was poking fun at it.
Right. Well, you know, I think it was just also supposed to be mirroring, you know, like where the guy had bumped into him, and it was like, okay, reminding us that had happened.
Yes.
I was like, oh, okay. You know, at the time I was like, oh my God, why would, you know, he have done that kind of thing? But because he
Finally got it at the end. He got everything at the end.
yeah. So it's kind of interesting about that. I hadn't noticed about that. And there was and then I think, and then I forgot what the music was. So now you guys both mentioned it, so I got to go and take a look at it.
I don't know if it was rap. I don't know
Was
if
this
that's
very loud or something like that?
no. You couldn't understand it. Was it?
Okay.
It wasn't a different language. I'm not sure what it was.
Okay.
Oh, my reaction just was, it was like very big and orchestral and like very, very dramatic. And I thought like over heightened for what was going on at the moment.
Right.
It was like, you know, you go into some stock music site and you type in heist movie and then you just download it.
Didn't fit with the movie. I didn't think it fit with the story at all.
It felt old fashioned and kind of forced. And the other thing that drove me crazy, okay, the coughing bothered me. Here's the other thing that really like set me off is, I think it's called a parallax effect. Have you ever had, you know where I mean, where like the person in the foreground stays still and then what the background moves, like as if I were sitting here and then it looks like my background is receding. And that happened twice. And the first time was with Christopher Plummer sitting in his desk. And I thought, okay, that's weird, but it's kind of like checking off the trope, you know, you kind of like see that kind of thing in these movies. And then there was, honest to God, the most awkward version of that when Denzel Washington is going from like the control truck to the bank or something like that. And the only way I can imagine that they film this is they put him on a really rough dolly and then they drag it along the street and he's kind of going like this with the street going behind him. And I thought that to me was the most over top, like Spike Lee going, wink, wink, you know, this is like a heist movie, but on steroids, you know. What did you guys think about that? Did you note that?
I did notice that he had done some like plays with camera stuff.
Yeah.
And I didn't really, I mean, it's hard when you notice it because then you're like pulled out of the story.
Yes.
But I didn't know why he did it other than I think he's Spike Lee, and so he doesn't get a whole lot of, you know, people saying, no, maybe you shouldn't be doing that, you know. So I feel like that does happen with like these really, really big directors with some of these movies where I think people like tend to just let them do whatever they want. Where if it was like somebody who was, you know, less famous, it'd be like there would be a more continuity, you know, kind of check for the whole thing. That was just kind of my thought about that because I know what you're talking about, and I remember thinking, you know.
Yeah, that one was so, I mean, it was almost laughably weird. Like if you just cut that out, it looked like a really bad like junior high school movie.
Right. Yeah.
And I feel like it was, and I think this is possibly a lesson one could draw, pro or con, from the movie, it's almost like he was occasionally dropping in to remind you, like, you may be getting sucked into the complex characters, but just remember, this is a movie. Like I could never immerse myself in it because there were always those weird things going on, like the music and the coughing and the weird parallax view effect. Like very self-referential sort of.
I think that's a good word to describe a lot of his stuff. I was
Yeah.
very surprised that this was his, because his movie, until I looked at it, because afterward I'm like, okay, so who did this, whatever. Because I didn't know he really actually did heist movies. So
Yeah.
it was really interesting to me to think, oh wow, he's done a heist movie.
Yeah, well, I read a couple after I watched it. I had to read a couple of reviews, and people were commenting like this was very different and more sort of studio, like traditional studio kind of fare, on the surface at least, maybe not in the actual execution of it, but on the surface.
Right.
The other thing that I was really on the fence about, and evidently my opinion about this is completely different than all professional reviewers, but I was really annoyed by the characters. Like, I thought that the Clive Owen character was too likable. Except the only time he did anything dislikable was when he beat up the one guy who didn't turn in his phone. So that was bad. But as time went on, he's this good looking guy. He's super smart, and he's kind of being like relatively thoughtful toward his hostages. He's like not arguing with his co-conspirators. I don't know. I mean, he was painted in an attractive way, whereas I think that Denzel Washington was not painted in a particularly attractive way. And I really disliked the Jodie Foster character. Really dislike. I mean, you were supposed to dislike her, but I disliked seeing Jodie Foster playing her. What did you guys think about those three main characters?
Mary, do you want to?
Well, I guess I don't know if it's mid, but when he sat with the boy and with the pizza, and he wanted to talk to his dad about the video he was watching, he had me. Then he was a good guy, and I don't know if that was midpoint, or how they say that something happens in the middle, and then it decides what's going to go on from there. But that's when I was fully invested in him, not before that. And Jodie, yeah, we don't like to see Jodie like that, but she was really good in playing that character. And she turned out, I mean, if I got the ending correctly, to be quite ethical, kind of, because Ben Lon is going to be, put him on a reference. Remember she said she has to get the nephew of Ben Lon, and she's going to put, what's his name, the bad guy.
Yeah,
Plummer.
Christopher Plummer, whatever his.
Yeah,
I can't remember what his
as a
character's name is.
reference. And then at the end, one enclosure when they gave the war crimes card, and so I don't know. She was a interesting character. You didn't get to know her that much. She swayed back and forth, and you couldn't stand her till you liked her, till you didn't know why she was there. That kind of thing. So,
yeah. I saw one review that referred to her more as a red herring, which I didn't think was true, because I think that whole sub story of, well, kind of the part, in a sense, the main story of why Christopher Plummer needed to get the document out of that safe. Him asking Jodie Foster to take care of that for him kind of hinged on that. And I do feel like if that role had been played by a man with all the same gestures and personal eccentricities and everything that the Jodie Foster character had, or if it had been not Jodie Foster, because it's not like I see Jodie Foster. And it was very interesting because, like, those are three characters. Those are the actors. I like the actors, but then I saw them in those roles. Like, I could never warm up to Denzel Washington because he seemed, I don't know, they gave him so many weird tics. It just seemed strange.
Yeah, everybody was super flawed. I mean, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think the kind of biggest thing that now is this, my husband and I were just talking about this today, because of course I make him like watch all these things with me again. As we were trying to figure out why Christopher Plummer would have held on to that information.
Yeah.
That was like probably the thing that I struggled with the most of this. And I would say, Mary, that I think that that particular box was the MacGuffin for this story. That was not a straightforward part of the heist, which was made it more interesting, I think. was that, you know, they look like they're going into a bank. What do you think they're going to steal? Duh, it's a bank. They're going to take a bunch of money. And then to find out in the end, oh, nothing's missing, nothing, no money's missing and stuff like that. And then just through that detective figuring out there's this one unmarked, noted lockbox that's missing. I guess lockbox is the best word. But anyway, I would say that was really the MacGuffin for the story, but there was like a red herring with that in a way, you know, a misdirection with that in a way, which I liked because it wasn't just the one thing that they were going to get and they kept getting that one thing. So for me, I liked that part of it.
I did want to comment on the document because that perplexed me too, especially because first of all, so spoiler alert, it was a document that indicated that Christopher Plummer had been complicit with the Nazis during World War II. But he also, there was also the ring. So there was the ring that he had stolen from his Jewish friend's wife that was obviously so, you know, identifiable as this ring that belonged to this wealthy Jewish banker, I think in Paris or something like that. And so why did you need the document? Like, you understand why he kept the enormous diamond ring, because it's an enormous diamond ring. And it was sufficient to prove his complicity. Yeah, I didn't understand that at all.
You wouldn't have a story if you didn't have the document,
well,
right?
I think that the only thing the document did is have the shock value of, you take the document out and there's a swastika on it. Okay, so it's clear it's a Nazi thing, but the ring provided the same connection once it was explained who it belonged to. And so you could have like the ring box opening up with the Cartier, you know, box, and then say, like, I was thinking that the ring was going to be even more distinctive, like in a more distinctive setting, and like all the other stones would just be loose stones, but this would be a very distinctive, instantly identifiable ring. And then you have the connection, and it's kind of more interesting because it's not like, look, it's a Nazi. And I don't know, that pissed me off.
Yeah, I think the reason story-wise why they kept it was just because it was so easy and identifiable, and that they could use that to like blackmail him so much more than a ring. But yes, I mean, it would have been so easy to like set fire to that paper. So yes, my criminal mind was like, how could I
also wonder, I don't know, Spike Lee, you know, what his intention was, but remember how he said that he's been trying to make up for his evil deeds, and I don't know, maybe you know, there's a subconscious thing where you want to be caught, you have it somewhere, and I don't know if that could all be involved in that. But you're right. Why would it be kept? You know?
Yeah.
That was a stretch.
Yeah. So anyway, I know we were talking about the three characters, but I just was kind of like, oh yeah, that was something that I had been even still trying to puzzle through kind of how to do that today. I liked the characters because they were different than what I expected. Just because it feels like, and this is an older movie, so, but now I feel like really pretty much whenever we see a character, a really recognizable character, a movie character, they're playing the same kind of character again and again and again, you know. And it was so I liked that in this one. It was like, oh, a little different, because I am also a fan of Clive Owen, and usually he plays like the rugged, you know, hero who goes against all odds for a variety of other kind of things. So it was like, oh, Clive Owen is, you know, a villain. I'm just curious about that. But yeah, he's not like really a villain. I enjoyed Jodie Foster. I think for me, exactly because I didn't have to hear if she had a husband, a boyfriend, a lover, a mother, any of that stuff.
Yeah.
All I had to know was she is this major power broker who getting of her, you know, talking to her on the phone is like a feat in itself. So I was like really curious about that. And like, what kind of parties does she go to? And like, what is her work? And how did she, you know, I was curious, like, I would have loved to know like more about that. Plus, I also thought she wore amazing shoes, which actually, which I was like, how could she wear those shoes? They look so uncomfortable, but yet they look so awesome, you know?
Yeah. And there was that long scene where they're walking along the river.
Yes,
and it's like it's framed in such a way to highlight her shoes. And all I could think of was like, I couldn't take my eyes off Jodie Foster's feet and legs. And I thought that must be like, she must have studied how ballerinas walk,
Yeah.
because it was a very like intentional walk. You
Mhm.
know, she would like swing her foot out and put the heel down with the
Yep.
toes pointed slightly out. And
Yeah.
like it was very like, I wonder if she had to get like a trainer to teach her how
Yeah.
to walk that way.
Yeah, she looked, yeah, no, she really like it was, I remember that too, like, wow, she walks in them like somebody who knows how to walk in them,
Yes,
not like how
yes.
I would walk in them, but like how somebody who's like,
Yes. But I was
um,
taken aback at the end when she showed
huh?
up with like a camisole under her jacket
Oh, in the barber shop?
in the barber shop. She
Yeah,
had like, I
yeah.
don't know, underwear. Do I sound like my mother when I'm saying this stuff? But
We might not be the three best people to be commenting on fashion trends.
yeah, that just felt very, because up till that point, it was like if you looked up pulled together in the dictionary, you were going to see the
Right,
Jodie Foster character.
right,
Even with
right.
like she had like the perfectly groomed
Yes,
hair with
yeah,
like the hair wrapped around it so
right,
you didn't see
yeah,
the hairband. And then
yeah,
you showed up with the camisole and I was like, really?
yeah,
Seems
yeah,
odd. It's kind of like
yeah.
it reminds me of the scene in Alien. I was thinking of this anyway because I believe that the Ripley character in Alien was originally written for a guy.
Oh,
And you can easily imagine a guy in there. You wouldn't have to change anything except this,
mhm,
well, not even maybe the suggestion of the romance between Ripley and the captain of the spaceship. But there's that scene at the end where she's like getting into the spacesuit and it's like
mhm,
shot from the ground up
mhm.
her legs. It
Oh
was
yeah,
kind of like that. I was like, I don't know. Does there always have to be the underwear scene with these
right,
women who
right.
are playing a sort of
Yeah,
non-gender specific role?
right. It's very interesting. Yeah. So I think for me, I liked those things about it. And then I liked that they were kind of against type a little bit. And I did enjoy the Christopher Plummer's character being uh more multifaceted because we're having a little Christopher Plummer mini fest here because we
Yes,
talked about him. We
having
talked about
done
him last.
Knives Out, right?
Right, and Knives
Yeah.
Out. And I did enjoy, him doing a character because he was such a good guy in that movie that I really enjoyed, like, oh, that he
Yes.
had this kind of like, pretty horrible other aspect to him. So I always like the flip side of showing stuff. So I did really enjoy those characters. Oh, one thing I wanted to say in the second time watching it was when Clive Owen was like beating up that guy in the guy who had the phone, then I wondered later, like, was he really? Like, I didn't remember. Did we know that he actually beat that guy up, or was it like one of his coworkers? Or I had that thought later. Like, was he one of the gang?
Well,
And
he
that
does show up later with his face banged up in
oh,
those like subsequent to them being let out and they're showing all the different people being
the
interviewed.
videos,
He
right?
does show up with his face all banged up. So
Yeah, and he
I
wasn't
think
in
the
the car.
implication is supposed that he really had been beaten up.
Yeah, and he wasn't in the car. He wasn't one of the ones in the car in the end, right?
No,
How'd you
no.
like the back and forth deciding what to do? That was so good. You know, when he walked back and forth
Oh,
to decide whether he was going to kill him or not.
yes.
Oh,
Did you notice that?
yeah.
I am thinking of it now that you're mentioning it, but I hadn't
Yeah, that
noticed it
was class.
consciously.
I thought that was good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I almost feel like there should have been a little more of that. Like I felt that the him sitting with the kid and commenting on the video game was a little too facile in terms of showing
Mhm.
that he was really a good guy. And I thought it would have, like, I think it could have gone in an interesting direction with some implication about to what extent the horrible scenes that were being played out in the video game, were going to play out in the heist. I felt like there was opportunity there that I would have rather seen that treated in a more nuanced way.
Mhm. Yeah, it was interesting. Like I was kind of surprised they didn't do more with it, but yeah, I liked the surprise factor of it because I wasn't thinking that there would be like I immediately thought, oh, they're gonna let this kid go. The
Right.
father and the kid go. You wouldn't, you would never keep them. So that was really kind of interesting. And I also enjoyed my surprise at the kid being so um just was just he'd had so much exposure to violence that none of this fazed him, you
Yeah.
know? And
Yeah.
that was another thing that like that surprised me, you know. So it was just kind of interesting, like kind of following my own reactions of
Mhm.
what I thought and what he kind of did. I really I think I'd mentioned in one of the things that I read that it took the writer 5 years to write this. And I thought that was really interesting, and it made me really happy for for our slow writers out there,
Yeah.
because it wasn't just like a plot that, you know, somebody stitched together in a pretty short period of time. You could see how, okay, he came up with this heist idea and then wrote another layer in and then wrote another layer in. So I really
Yeah.
liked that element about it, and was like really happy when I heard that.
Well, it is interesting that in the end, it truly is. It's just a heist movie. It's just that what he's stealing is slightly more sophisticated than just stealing money out of the bank.
Right.
But I do wonder, like, how he came up with. I think some of those were kind of cribbed from other heist movies,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
but you know, some of them I'm sure he made up. Well, I shouldn't say.
Yeah.
I would be curious to know how he ended up getting the idea of how the heist was going to be
Yeah.
executed.
Okay, so Maddie, we need to get him on the podcast. You need
Yeah,
to it would be great to I'll see if I can find out his name and then to see if he's around, because maybe it would be pretty cool if you could interview him, because it'd be
yeah.
like interesting to hear about all those kind of things. But like a recent like a couple, I'd seen the zombie heist movies that were super popular on Netflix, Zack Snyder, I think. And oh my gosh, like those are, and I watched those thinking like, oh yeah, I wish there was more subtlety. I wish there was a little more, you know, layers to
You
it, as
want
opposed to
subtlety
like,
in the zombie heist
I
movie, though? I
don't
don't
know, what is
know.
the matter with me? But it was like, okay, we're going through, you know, we want this thing, we got to go through zombies to get it. And it was like, yeah, okay, there's a few like switch offs and stuff like that. But it was like, I wish there had been, you know, I feel like a lot of times the zombie movies that are popular of late rely a lot on like force and gore and stuff like that. And this was, you know, a pretty low level of violence, generally
Like
speaking.
that, yeah.
Yeah, for a zombie, I mean for a heist movie, not a zombie movie. That would have been interesting if Spike Lee had decided to add some zombies in it.
Yes. Well, you never know. Next time.
Do we know how he knew to go to what box and how he knew all that?
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
there was he was looking through the sheets of the boxes and going through it was a list of all the box numbers, and then I guess some more information about it, who they belong to or something. And he noticed that box number wasn't on any of the lists.
No, I mean the villain. Do we know?
Oh,
We
good
don't have,
point.
yeah, we don't have any idea. We don't, and I thought that was really interesting.
Or not
There
the
was,
villain?
yeah, yeah. So that kind of was like leaving it open-ended for us to figure
So
that out.
he had it was almost as if he knew, like he was trying to right a wrong. I mean, he wanted money too, but
Right.
that's why he left the ring. And it was almost like the impetus for doing it was not the money. I mean, I know he wanted the money, but there was a subtle hint that there was something more than that, unless he just wanted that in case he got caught. You know, that was presented too, if he had that document. But it was like he wanted to right a wrong, follow the ring, right?
Well, he did have the diamond seller was one of the guys in the car at the end.
Oh,
so
okay,
maybe we're supposed to think that the diamond seller had somehow been associated with the diamonds that Christopher Plummer had. I don't. That's as close as I can come up with.
All right.
Yeah, I think so, because the diamond seller said something like, you know, do you have it or whatever, and yeah.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Right. And he was like annoyed that he'd like, oh no, it's in good hands or something like that.
So he knew the history, I guess.
Yes.
Okay.
I think they implied that.
That completely went past me, so I didn't get it. Yeah, but I enjoyed the movie anyway.
Yeah. It's a lot of little pieces that you know, you're trying to like wrap up in the end part. And so things.
Well, you would consider this a mystery, right? Is this a mystery?
It has mystery elements in it, but I would consider it a thriller. Kind of, because we're like, usually the thriller elements, well, Maddie can speak more about that, but I was just kind of thinking really a thriller is usually like a thing at stake, as opposed to like who done it. But I don't know. What do you think, Maddie?
Yeah, it's more like a why done it in a way. I mean, there's certainly a mysterious aspect to it. There's a reveal, and so it's mysterious in that sense. But yeah, it does seem like a sort of a combination. It would be interesting. Not that I want to go down a path of doing a whole bunch of heist movies, but it would be interesting to, like, they actually say Dog Day Afternoon in the movie. So one of the
Right.
characters says, "What do you think this is, Dog Day Afternoon?" So it'd be interesting to watch Dog Day Afternoon now and see in what ways it's similar and what ways it's different to Inside Man.
Yeah.
I was thinking of, we were talking about the fact that I think you guys both commented on the character's development. And one thing I thought was interesting was that Christopher Plummer's entire explanation for what he had done was him saying to, I guess, the Jodie Foster character, I was in my 20s and I was ambitious. So I'm curious as to whether you felt in the context, like to the extent that you knew Christopher Plummer's character at that point, was that sufficient for you? Did it feel too light? Did it feel right? What are your thoughts about that?
I believed it only because I think that people can do pretty horrible things if given the opportunity. And I was really imagining, oh, okay, he's in a place where he's ambitious and there's really no checks, on this. So I didn't have as much of a problem with that as I did of like him keeping the document.
Yeah.
But I thought it was a little much how it was a little heavy-handed about how much of like this great benefactor he was.
Yeah.
Like you kind of assume like any kind of super wealthy person, they do enough charity stuff. So, and maybe that's just like our exposure now with forever hearing about it with all the billionaires and stuff like that. But it was just kind of like, oh, okay, so that seemed like a little overkill, but that was just kind of my impression on that. I had less trouble imagining he got into that kind of thing, that he got into the money in a, really awful way.
Yeah.
I heard regret more than remorse, when he said, I could have saved them. That's regret, not so much remorse in my mind. So it was kind of, and even, yeah. And he, in the end, it was all about self-preservation. So,
yeah. Yeah, he really was. And even in that barbershop chair where after all this stuff has gone through, and he's like, yeah, worried about the bin Laden thing. And it was just like,
yeah,
okay.
I thought that was wonderful. Because if it's true, I mean, then he was done anyway.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, if it leaked to wherever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And knowing Jodie Foster's character, she would do it. So
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
But you're right. She wasn't dressed for the part, Maddie. You're right.
No, right up until that
outfit was
part. I was like, is she going to go seduce Christopher Plummer?
She wasn't
Very
dressed
disappointed. But the other thing that I think is interesting is that I can't remember what year this movie came out, but if Christopher Plummer had really been in his 20s during World War II, he would have had to have been like 95 in the movie. And he was clearly not 95. It was the best preserved 95 ever. But so you have this, very, they gave him a cane. But you didn't get a sense that this was a man kind of like at the very end of his life. But if he had been at the very end of his life, then it's sort of, I think it would have been interesting to look at the story, if you were the screenplay writer and you were thinking about how you wanted to wrap this up. I can imagine an ending that would have, I think, been very interesting, where the guy is between a rock and a hard place between, the Jodie Foster character and, and his reputation, let's say. And he thinks, you know what, I've been playing this game for 70 years or however long it's been. And I would rather end it now than allow myself to be brought low by this person. And I can also imagine a scenario where he just decides to give it up, whatever the give it up means, whether it means committing suicide or whether it means allowing himself to be, revealed as the criminal he was. Thoughts about that?
I thought he was going to commit suicide. I had that in my head. And
Yeah.
then he didn't, after Denzel left, when they
Yeah.
had talked.
Yeah.
Yeah, that it was really, I was surprised to see him again after that. I remember the barbershop thing was like really interesting in a way because it was so everyday, and you would have thought, oh, he's like, I don't know, got a bunch of lawyers, he's flown to some other place that he can't have extradition, or there's some other thing going on. But it was such a really interesting snapshot of a man who clearly gotten away with so much for so long that he just is carrying on normal. And I thought that was really, it took me by surprise because it wasn't what I was expecting. I think I was just thinking, and maybe that's me, but like the first thing I ever remembered seeing him in was like the Sound of Music stuff. And so I was thinking that I think that worked for like subconsciously in this movie. I was always thinking, because I identified him with somebody who like repudiated the Nazi behavior. So I think it was really interesting and I wondered how much that would have played into selecting him to be that role.
Yeah.
Because it was just kind of interesting of thinking about that, because I was just like, even at the end, I kept thinking, really? Like,
We believe this,
yeah, there's some other side that we don't know about, some other aspect of the story. No, so this really kind of interesting about that with the characters of how he did that. So,
did either of you notice the chair that Jodie Foster was sitting against in the barbershop? It was mended. There was I mean, if he has that much money, did you notice that the leather or whatever was like pieced together, like there had been a hole and then it was pieced over it, and I thought that's really odd.
And it was, the barbershop was like not like she had to go through several things to get to it. It was like kind of a secret barbershop. Yeah, that was really interesting. Yeah.
I assumed it was a man's club, like a men only club where,
Right.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I hadn't noticed that, but I had liked it wasn't what wasn't where I was expecting she would wind up.
Right.
First,
I thought it was a bathroom because the guys are saying you're not allowed in here.
Right.
But then maybe that's just Spike Lee's humor, the torn and then the mended chair that she's sitting against across a billionaire or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other moments that you guys noticed that you thought like either you thought was especially good or took you aback?
Well, one thing I liked that because I like the kind of weary detective trope, as it were. I liked how he had all kinds of bosses against him, and it always seems like that's the case in these things, or people don't believe in him. He's messed up before, he messes up again, he's out, all that kind of stuff. So I was like, oh yeah, they use that in this. So that was just kind of interesting to see how they did that. And I really like who was the SWAT team guy? Dennis. Oh. Anyway, there was just interesting to me. They had all these like really big famous people in these smaller roles, then kind of little things. So that was just kind of interesting to see. Oh, that you would know this is a Spike Lee movie because of that.
Yeah. And there was that whole kind of montage at the end where they would show like a second or two of that character with the name up. That felt very retro to me.
Yes. Yeah. So I guess, and the other thing that struck me, which doesn't really have a whole lot to do with the movie, but just the snapshot in time of having recently been in New York City, I was like, oh my God, it was so bare, and it was just like how the populations keep growing and growing and growing. And at that time, it's just kind of interesting to see. I was like, I think it was 2005 when when the movie came out. And so I was just thinking, it's like, almost 20 years later, and just how the city's only become dirtier and more congested and all this kind of stuff. So it was kind of interesting to see that of how that was set up. Yeah.
Is the way that it was set up in the beginning, is that all trope, how all the police and how they surrounded the bank? Is that typical is that considered trope situational or?
I would just say that's like a typical setup. I think, they're really trying to show like how it's typically handled and this kind of like the routineness of it and the formulaic setup. And then, you have this things that come in of like the Jodie Foster and these other kind of things that are going to be cutting into the procedural element of it. Because I think he did kind of try to set it up as a procedural and then played with that idea a lot, like we were kind of talking about in there. I don't know. What do you think, Maddie?
Well, I like that part because I just like seeing the logistics of how that happened. And I guess that by showing all that, it's a way of quickly illustrating the difficulty of getting out of that in the manner that the Clive Owen character claims he's going to. So I thought it was effective that way. It was kind of exciting to watch. And I also felt that it accomplished an actual story supporting function of dealing with that in a very quick and efficient way.
Right. And I didn't understand until the second time I watched it. I thought about it of like, oh, the inside man, there's like so many like meanings of that I didn't get. And I was like, because it's like his authors were always trying to come up with a good title, and I was like, oh yeah, that is really good,
So what are the different interpretations of Inside Man that you noticed the second time around?
Well, I guess before I just kind of thought about, basically, there was like because they kept saying, it has to be an inside job. It has to be an inside job. And so and then of course, there were those people the people that participated in it who weren't caught. But I mean, just the whole idea of him shutting himself up inside the bank for a week.
That's
and then,
right.
I'm going to walk out, and I was like, duh, inside man. I didn't get
That's
it.
how I got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I didn't get it. It was, I didn't
Now,
get
is that the secret sauce that he did that? Is that what you mean by secret sauce?
Well, it was
Jennifer?
definitely one of the things that I wasn't expecting
Right.
about that. I was trying to think of what I was thinking about when I said secret sauce. I think that was one of the things because he kept saying, I'm going to walk out of here in the end, and they're like, no, you aren't, and all that, and they did this thing, and they made everybody think that somehow they were going to go out through the sewers. There was some kind of element about that. But I really think that for me, the secret sauce element of this was really just how the characters had these different elements to them. Like, Maddie mentioned, like the good guy wasn't really as good as he seemed, and the bad guys weren't really as bad as they seemed. And I enjoyed that shading and having, I think for me, having a female character who was just like, not likable, I actually liked because I just feel like a lot of times, that doesn't so much happen. So
yeah,
she was just about her job and that was it. And she didn't make apologies about that. And I was like, oh, this is so refreshing,
Yeah. Well, I did really enjoy watching her. Like anything that happened, she was always in charge. And there was that one moment where Denzel Washington's character was playing back the tape that he had of her.
Yes.
Watching her expression, like her trying to rearrange her features into the kind of smirky, I know what you're doing kind of expression that she'd had the whole rest of the time, I thought was pretty brilliant.
Yeah. Yes, it was. And I liked just the little things of like just the little things of like, ordering. See, they could order pizzas, but they couldn't order sandwiches because it was sandwiches. They, just all these things.
I love stuff like that.
Yeah, like all the little details were like, oh yeah, same thing. I like love that kind of thing. And like, they wouldn't just the games that they played with the phone calls and stuff too were kind of, no, I'm not gonna. He calls, no, I'm not gonna pick up. I'm gonna let him sweat a little bit, and then just all these. And then he'd give him these little quizzes and things like that. So those were like unexpected for me.
And then how they bantered about the answer, inside the thing among themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I finally got it. He would have said their answer was correct, whatever they had said, because he was trying to stall for more time. It took me a while to get that.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
No, same. Yeah. No, I agree. Like then you're like realize later, like, oh yeah, whatever he was doing. Yeah. So I don't know. I think it's just a neat one where it is like packed with tropes, but yet they're all like twisted a little bit. And also that combination of developed to fit in that. It's not formulaic in terms of that New York City world, And I think that's what helps make it feel not just like a generic heist movie, like those little details we were talking about with the setup in the beginning of the tape going around, and they bring in the command truck, and even like how that whole command truck worked was interesting when Christopher Plummer's like, he's coming in, he's just going to settle himself down in that command truck and hang out with everybody else. And they're like trying to shoo him out the door and stuff. I was like, thought that was very interesting, and thinking like, oh, it'd be really interesting to see could you do a whole movie from a command truck, heist from that perspective.
Yeah, I think that would be very interesting.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting to think about all the stuff.
Would you say that this movie, was it equal in terms of character development and plot, or do you think one superseded the other?
Good question.
Just wondering what you think.
Yeah, no, I really think I really feel like they worked really well together. And so it wasn't super obvious to me that it was like, for me, at least one versus the other was what made it. I really liked the characters, and because of that, I followed along the twists. And that's usually how I like, when I like stuff, it's usually because of the characters. So I would say for me, that was probably how that worked stronger with that. Where like, to contrast it with the zombie heist movies that I've watched recently, those are very much action, 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 action. And the plot of the movie is resultant of these activities that are occurring, and less so driven by the characters, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know what you guys think about it. But...
Yeah, well, I got fascinated with the plot aspect, and I think that's more a quirk of what I like to watch, more so than like a well thought out critique of the movie itself. But I did get hung up on some plot things. Like, I thought, really, it hasn't occurred to anyone that what they're hearing is a recording of somebody speaking Albanian. I was like, even I can figure that out.
Yeah.
And so it would be interesting, like, for people who really watch heist movies, was there anything in here where at the end they said, whoa, that was really new? But I think that for character development, I almost felt like I could imagine Spike Lee meeting with the characters and saying, now, Denzel, in this scene, we kind of need to achieve this. Just go ahead. Because I always kind of felt like I was watching Denzel Washington. I was watching Jodie Foster. I never had that sense of like immersing myself in the character. And I can imagine that might have been exactly what Spike Lee was hoping for, that you're enjoying watching Denzel Washington and Jodie Foster and Christopher Plummer and Clive Owen and do these things more so than I'm immersed in what is seeming like a realistic and fully realized set of people.
Right.
So let's switch to the question of what each of us would draw as a pro and a con lesson from Inside Man. And Jennifer, let's start with you.
Okay. Well, what I like about it is a thing that I'm always trying to like work on myself too, is the slow reveal. Like, we don't know we find out a lot of the other aspects of the characters, like at that 50% plus point in the movie. And I was just reading like, Donald Moss talks about like, that's where you want to have like more of the secrets revealed. And I felt like that they did that in this, continually through it in that back half, which kept it interesting for me. So I think that was a really good example about that. Things that I liked less about it. I guess another thing I would say that I liked was that kind of detail that I feel like takes a trope beyond just being a cliche and makes it something we can use as a trope. And like the example of the Albanian was a good example of that for me, because it was just so New York. They pull this guy out of the crowd and they're like, oh yeah, I know it's Albanian because I don't want to talk to her again. And then they bring her in, and like she comes in, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it's this woman who's going to hustle down here and be like all in a hurry to help save this event. And she pulls out this bag of the parking tickets, and it was like, take care of these first, then we'll talk. And I was like, oh, that's like so great.
Yeah. So
like those little things really helped me like feel like, oh, there were a lot of other characters beyond this world, beyond just the ones I was happy to see on screen. And then I guess the thing that's always a struggle, or the thing that is that whole idea of the plausibility of like, so why did Christopher Plummer have that? So if I'm working on a heist story, you have to, like, on one hand, everybody wants to you want them to jump on board and follow you with it, but yet on the other hand, try to not leave these things that are kind of like obvious of like why he wouldn't have gotten rid of something that's a pretty significant piece of evidence earlier. So I guess that's like this kind of plot hole idea would be something that's we're always trying to guard against,
Yeah.
you know? So yeah, how about you guys?
Yeah, Mary, what do you think? What is a pro and a con you took away?
As a reader, you know, I liked that there was a sense of danger, but just so much, you know, that that there wasn't, that you got the sense you should be afraid, but something's going on here where you don't have to be as afraid. So I like that a lot. And I like the whole, I mean, paying attention, not just watching it, but paying attention to, Jennifer, what you talk about tropes, and like you did with the Knives Out, and Matty did. It's just, there's so many things going on, you know, and I would never think of attempting a story like this. That's why I don't go near like thinking about mysteries with Louise Penny, or, you know, because it's so complicated. There's so twists and turns, and, you know, there's just a lot going on, you know, and you have to know where to put the stuff in for it to make sense. The downside to it, there's quite a bit that didn't make sense, but I didn't care because I enjoyed the story. If that makes sense. Oh, and it was a happy ending. I liked the ending.
Yeah, everybody kind of got their due at the end.
Yeah,
I'd say that I like the idea of the complexity of characters, but as I'm thinking about this, I realized that for me it was more effective in the bank customers and employees that they were interviewing, and then the ones that turned out actually to be involved. Because I thought that those characters were much more subtly done than the Jodie Foster or Denzel Washington, Clive Owen kind of thing. So I would really look to those secondary characters as a great model of drawing those more complex characters and complex motivations. And then I think this might be kind of a repeat of a conversation that we had about Knives Out, that the thing that I didn't like about it was these, to me, seemingly inconsistent moments of sort of cartoonishness in the middle of what for a while seemed more realistic and gritty, and then suddenly there was some weird thing going on. And I think I would have been happier if it had been a director who just picked an approach. This is going to be sort of a tongue-in-cheek, you know, we're rolling our eyes a little bit at that whole heist trope kind of thing. I can imagine that being very well done, or more of a straightforward kind of documentary-esque, which in a way I think would have been better, because if you're doing something about is someone who turned his Jewish friends over to the Nazis in World War II going to get his comeuppance, I kind of wanted to be more of that second than more of the first. So I like something that is more consistent in the tone that it presents, and I would look to do that in my own work.
Oh, I just had one other thought that I remember watching it that I got the second time that I didn't before, and it was the way they used those snapshot interviews. I was like, oh, that in fact became the B storyline of this. You know how a lot of times and I didn't realize that the first time when I watched it, and that way it was like, we still are wondering what's happening with the bank in real time, and then they're, you know, splicing it in with these interviews. And it was kind of like they did that also with like When Harry Met Sally. You've seen it like again, you know, and used in other ways. But I thought, oh, that was really interesting that I hadn't, you know, kind of got that before, because it's hard to tell something in real time to keep the tension all the way through and not have all these other like kind of little subplots through it. So that was this kind of interesting thing to think about.
Well, I thought a gutsy part of that decision is that each time someone showed up, you're like, oh, okay, well, this person survives. This person survives. This, I was like keeping the mental list of who survived, and then pretty soon I was like, it appears that everyone is surviving this. And it was interesting that he very intentionally and overtly took that off the, like, guess what? Everybody's fine. Nobody dies. And to do that in what is intended to be like a suspenseful movie, that's a pretty gutsy move.
Right. And the other thing I thought is, I thought when I watched it the second time, the people that they were really interrogating and giving a hard time to, they weren't any of the ones who were actually involved in it, right? It was, they let the people that were like the chesty girl, They were very distracted by that. And then she ended up in the end actually being one of the ones, and they kind of, so I just remember like thinking, oh, is that true? Did they like totally miss,
Well, there was the young guy where they said he was like kind of the punk. I think he was one of the bad guys.
Oh yeah.
And the diamond salesman.
Mhm.
One hard of hearing, right?
There was an
Was
older
he the
guy.
one hard of hearing? Oh, that was
Yeah, there were, I think there were two, and I
Yeah.
know, I thought they were, I thought it was the older guy was.
Yeah,
gonna
it
be-
would be interesting to go back again and see
Yeah.
Of each of those interviews, which of those
Right.
turned out to be the ones that
Right.
were in fact involved.
Yeah.
So fun. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us for
nice.
this conversation. This was a great conversation. I feel like I took some lessons that I can apply to my own writing. So thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Mary. And for anyone who's listening to this and would like to join a future What Writers Can Learn discussion, and you can do that by becoming a patron of The Indie Author, and you can go to patreon.com/The Indie Author, and that's Indie with a Y. And I will also be announcing upcoming episodes of this on the Indie Author podcast. So Jennifer and Mary, thank you again so much for joining me for this.
Nice seeing you.
Fun. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, take care.